Okay, thank you, Jim. For the first time, I am going to tell the whole truth about the laboratory of Dr. Hans Gruber and what we found there. Some of you may find the story a little hard to swallow, and some of you may find the story a lot hard to swallow. But in war, there are a number of things which can be unnerving to a person and which he has trouble believing even to this day. Some of you with a scientific background will want to take special note. I have never spoken of this to a soul except my wife, who is now deceased. But for future historians and for you YouTubers, I would like to grab a clean breast of things. So here goes, the story about what we saw when we stumbled across the incredible scene of Dr. Gruber's laboratory. First, a little background. Our carrier group had been stationed in Rouen, which is just north of the Pyrenees, in the early spring of '43. We were moved there after the incident involving the mayor's children and the underground caves, which resulted in the burning of the entire town of Nevers and the relocation of its many residents. Rouen had long been contested territory, changing hands from the French to the Germans many times over hundreds of years. The name Rouen comes from the old German Ruhn, which means ruin. There were quite a number of interesting architectural sites there, and many of them can be seen to this day. One old Gothic temple built to the god Osiris is of particular interest, though it no longer exists today, since it is the setting of our story. The food in Rouen is very wonderful. There is an old tradition in Rouen of cooking beef on slabs of stone that stick out of the countryside. Those stones are called rochers cailloux, and they are heated by geothermal energy by being buried deep into the earth. These rocks stick out, their roots deep underground, the heat of the earth warming them, transmitting intense heat up to the surface. Imagine if Stonehenge in England were a giant flat iron grill. Every year the residents of Rouen hold the same festival where they go to the beaches and roast a freshly slaughtered calf or lamb on the rocks. The women are barefoot and very courteous, and the men quietly drink as the women serve them. There are no children. I had an anthropologist friend who pointed that out to me and said he thought it was strange. There were no children in Rouen. They had to import them from the countryside. Men and women would marry, but live in separate houses. There were no mistresses in Rouen because husband and wife were never able to grow sick from proximity. An old city ordinance from medieval times made it this way, and if you do the math, you will find that when you count the number of houses in Rouen, divide them by 2, you have half as many residents. Our staff sergeant Rosenberry was overly fond of children. To him, it didn't matter whether they were girls or boys, since at a certain age they all looked the same. It became so natural that Rosenberry would parade around 5 or 6 naked children wearing army helmets, and no one would raise an eyebrow. We had other things on our minds, like who was going to get shot. Rosenberry was found stabbed by a pair of head shears one day, but he always said he could die happy if he had the taste of youth on his lips. In the same vein, we once found an entire squad of dead German soldiers whose lips had been cut off. It made no sense to anybody, and Army intelligence, as usual, was stumped. If the Germans didn't want them to talk, they could have just cut out their tongues. Instead, they cut off their lips, as if they didn't want them giving away any secrets to lip readers at a distance. We consulted the local French authorities on the practice, who said that it was a message for black American soldiers, who the Germans believed would eat their lips to make their own lips get bigger. We had a giant corporal in our ranks named Downey. He could out-wrestle an ox, but he was a gentle sort of fellow, the sort any good girl would like to have pinning her down. Corporal Downey was in favor of practical jokes, but he only knew one. He called it corporal punishment. He would pick you up by your legs and try to snap your legs apart like a wishbone before you fell over backwards. Sometimes he succeeded. It was a running joke in Able Company to send him over to the field hospital with the name of someone he could play the joke on, only to have it turn out to be a double amputee. Anyway, it was clear the Germans had cold and brutal scientific minds. It was their fatal flaw. Their thinking was too disciplined. They couldn't realize they were becoming inhuman because they were on such a coldly rational path where one foot followed logically upon another. I will give you an example. There was a Hungarian circus that passed through Rouen one day with a number of oddities. One of these was a little fellow whose feet were joined at the heel. His toes pointed in opposite directions. This was quite a joke on him, having feet but unable to walk. Nature is full of these little jokes, and this is what the Germans could not grasp. Toodaloo!